Hi everyone, this video is a part of Macquarie University's coding tutorials, and today we'll be talking about function design. Only design, no implementation, no coding. It's probably one of the most important videos in this entire series, along with arrays, and we'll see the importance of functions and how much more enjoyable and easier it makes programming. In day-to-day life, we use functions all the time. When you order some food at the shops, when you give somebody a contract to paint your house, to mow your lawn, even when you ask anyone a question, what you're doing is you're performing an interaction. You're asking somebody to do something for you, and in return, you get an answer. You might get a product, or you might get some sort of feedback. Now, a function has three very important components. What are you going to name the function? What do you name the function depends on the purpose of the function. So a function is a little piece of code that operates on certain parameters, as we'll see very soon. So depending on what's the purpose of the function, if you're mowing the lawn, then it's mow. If painting the house, paint. If you're ordering food at food court or at restaurant, get meal, something like that. So here I have some examples of the intent or the purpose, and then we're going to come up with the three aspects of those functions. The first one being function name. The second aspect is parameters, or what kind of inputs does a function require. For example, if I want you to tell me the square of a given number, I have to give you that number, and that number has to be a valid number. It cannot be hallelujah, because there's no square of hallelujah. So parameters determines how many inputs are required and what is the valid types of those inputs. Finally, a function may return a value. So when I ask somebody what's the square of 5, they're going to tell me that the square of 5 is 25. When I ask someone what's the last digit in the number 1729, they will tell me that the last digit in 1729 is 9. If I ask someone what's the square root of 2, they will give me an answer 1.414 and so on and so forth. So in many cases, we get an answer back. I can also ask someone, is 35 a negative number? And they will say no. So the answer is false, which is of type Boolean. But in many cases, a function may not actually return a value. The function might just do what it's supposed to do and return the control back to you. For example, painting the house. If I ask someone to paint the house, they'll paint the house and they'll just tell me, all done, which means that the function doesn't return anything. We call this type void. Void means nothing. So the function doesn't return anything. Without much further ado, let's take a look at what we're going to name these functions based on the intent. The first one, checking if a given number is even. We are checking if the number is even or not. So the name of the function will be isEven. Parameter. So the number has to be provided to the function, but we cannot check if 2.6, 1.9, 3.14159, these are even numbers. Even or odd is defined only on whole numbers or integers. So the valid input is one number of type int. Once we pass this integer to the function isEven, the function will return either it is an even number or it's not an even number. There are only two states, which means it returns a Boolean. You can also encode it as an int and return either 0 or 1, 0 or 10, 1 or 5, based on the outcome. But logically speaking, Boolean is the most suitable outcome of this function. My second function, to get the average of two integers. Because it's calculating the average, the name is average. This question clearly indicates that I want the average of two integers, and therefore the parameters will be integers. Now the average of 6 and 10 is 8, which is an integer, but the average of 6 and 9 is 7.5, which is not an integer. So in many cases, the output will be float, and therefore we'll have the return type as float, because all integers are floats. My third function is to get the outcome of a six-faced dice roll. So it's a normal six-faced dice. It's not a Dungeons and Dragons or any other fancy die. It's a simple six-faced die. So the name of the function will be roll the dice. So just roll the dice and we'll get an outcome. Parameters. Because we know that it's a normal six-faced die, we don't have to provide any parameters because the smallest value we know is 1 and the highest value we know is 6. So no parameters. The return type, it can either be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6 with equal probability. So the return type is an int. My fourth function is to draw a box. Now a box, like a parcel, we have to decide where the box will be drawn. I'm jumping ahead. First, the function name, draw box. What are the inputs? We have to specify where the box will be drawn and what are the dimensions. Optionally, what's the color of the box? So we'll need two integers for the location, x and y. We'll need three integers for the dimensions, height, depth, and width. And we'll need a color optionally. Now, typically speaking, you don't want a function with too many parameters, but that's a story for another day. What's the function going to return? This function draws the box on the screen but doesn't return anything. So we say the return type is void. Void means it doesn't return any value. It simply transfers the control. My last function is to check if exactly one of the two booleans provided is true. So if they are both true or if they are both false, the function should return false. This is the classic exclusive OR operation. So we're going to name it that, XOR. The parameters will be two booleans and return type will be one boolean value. That's it. Let's take a look at some of the function design questions that I've already written. In this function, the name of the function is positive. I'm trying to check if a given number is positive or not. Now I've done here int, but I can also check if 1.5 is a positive number or negative 2.7 is a positive number. So in reality, is positive should check float. So now we can see that our function checks if a given number, floating point number, is positive or not. It's either positive or it's not positive. By the way, 0 is a non-positive, non-negative number. So the answer is of type Boolean. Now, I can have several clients calling the function. So a function can be called by several clients. Now, in your programming, it can be setup or draw or mouse press or a function that you create yourself. If client 1 passes the value 10, that's fine because 10 is the same as 10.0. 10 is a floating point number. My function will check if it is a positive number, which it is, and therefore return true. Another client may pass it the value, let's say negative 7.2. And when is positive receives that number, it checks if that number is positive, and because it's not positive, it will return false. It's going to do the same thing for 0.0 as well. 0 is not a positive number. If a third client passes the value hello, the string, is positive expects a float, but the value being passed is not a float, it's a string. And that's where you'll get a compilation error and your program is not going to work. My second example is one that checks if a given number is a square, it returns the square of a given number. I can calculate the square of integers and I can calculate the square of floating point values. Because all integers are floating point values, the overall parameter type is float. So it's going to get a float and then return a float as well. My first client calls the function with the value 1.2. 1.2 is a float. Square function will calculate its square and return 1.44. The same client can again call the function, this time by passing the value 1 take away 7 divided by 2.0. That's fine because this is a floating point expression. So as long as the outcome of the expression is a float, that's an acceptable input. First, this expression is evaluated to negative 2.5, and this is the value that is passed to the function, and the function returns the answer 6.25. A second client passes the value 0. Because it's a valid float, it calculates the square of 0 and returns the value 0.0. A third example. In this simplified example, all I'm trying to do is draw a person. When I draw a person, I have to specify at what position and what dimension. So the dimension can determine either height or width. And assuming that aspect ratio is predefined, we can draw the person at that location. So here, the name of the function is drawPerson, and the parameters are 3 integers, the first 2 specifying the location, and the third integer specifying the size of the person. In this example, the function doesn't return any value. When you call the function with 10, 70, 50, it will draw the person at location 10, 70 of size 50, but not return any value. It will simply transfer the control. And that's why we call the return type void. My last example is actually for you. So given all these examples that we've seen, I would like you to come up with the function name, parameters, and return type for each of these 4 specifications. The first function returns the square root of a given integer. The second function returns the average of 2 integers, which is an example that we've already done. The third function draws a point at a given coordinate. And the fourth function checks if a given point lies inside a given circle. So this one is very interesting. So you have a circle, but how do we represent the circle? So how do we convey the circle's specifications is what will decide the parameters. And you also have to specify where is the point. So if you feel like it, please leave your answer as a comment to this video, and I'll provide some feedback as soon as possible. In next video, we are going to go from design to implementation of functions, and this structured approach will help you a lot in having a deep understanding of functions. Thank you.